Folks, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Jason Kavich. I'm an associate professor of management and strategy at the Huizenga College of Business. What we're going to talk about is management, managing from the top. I'll spend about 45, 50 minutes talking about a presentation I have. We're going to talk about strategic management, managing from the top. Now, folks, this is basically strategic management is the language of the executive. It's the language of the C-suite. It's the language in the boardroom, because it really, the discipline, the academic discipline, which is about 70 years old from about 1950 or so. And prior to that, there was a lot of strategy in military and also politics. And so over the last 70 years, we've imported a number of theories and concepts that we've tested to see whether they apply in the business world to really determine what works and what doesn't work in the business world. But the point of this particular topic is really to help people think strategically and know the fundamentals of the best research in the world. And when I say that, let me clarify that a little bit. That is the academic research that is published in our top tier journals, A+ journals that are peer reviewed, which have incredibly difficult rigor, acceptance rates, but also very high statistical reliability and credibility, okay, and validity as well. So let's start here. What do we mean by strategy? And so what happens is a lot, and it depends on the size of the organization. Size is a very important part in strategy, because the larger your organization, often the more resources you have, right? And so you might be able to hire or have a strategy department or people who do strategic planning for you, which most of the Fortune 1000, Russell 3000 companies can, but a number of organizations can't, depending on if you're a nonprofit, if you are a private company that maybe isn't that large at this point in time. However, there are still a number of concepts that are generalizable throughout. I do want to read the definition here. A firm's strategy is defined by the specific market positioning, competitive moves, and business approaches that form management's answer to what's our plan for running the firm and producing good results. A lot of organizations have checklists, have plans, have meetings around developing some type of plan, which may often be driven solely by the CEO, may work well with the C-suite team, may partner with the board. But the point is, a lot of times what we've learned throughout the last 70 years of historical research and strategy is that plans need to be much more comprehensive than they normally are. And that requires a lot of thought, a lot of analysis. It's very data-driven. These aren't just, strategy is not just a qualitative discipline where people sit around and share their anecdotes, their experiences. This is a very data-driven process in conjunction with people's experiences, in addition with their opinions and thoughts on how a firm should move forward. The other thing that's transpiring is when a company decides a certain direction for their organization, two things will happen. One, they'll try and go by their plan. But secondly, strategy is also emergent. One of the main things, and I can tell you folks, so my certification as a NACD certified corporate director, on the forefront of boards and C-suite people's minds are strategy, cybersecurity risks, model disruption, technological disruption that can make your business, your organization irrelevant, and make it irrelevant quickly. So when you're developing hopefully a fairly thorough, comprehensive plan, and we're going to look at some of those things going forward, you're committing, I underlined it here, you're committing to one set of actions rather than another, right? And this has to do in economics with opportunity costs. You're picking and choosing. And now let me give you some statistics here that really matter. I'll give you a few different examples. Strategic management is usually the capstone course in undergraduate business programs and also MBA programs. And the reason behind that is because it's the hardest course in the program. Students have to put together all their pieces: finance, accounting, marketing, management, data analytics, information systems, etc. And then they use the most sophisticated business simulations in the world, where they're running multi-billion-dollar international firms making dozens of decisions each week. The top consulting firms in the world, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, Accenture, etc. They use these type of simulation tools as well to help executives and board members. But the point I want to take away from this slide before we move on is that you're committing to one direction, one set of decisions, knowing that there's a cost, the opportunity cost of not going another direction. We know statistically, this is over thousands of studies, review articles, meta-analyses, that 50% of all strategic decisions fail. It's a coin toss. And these are executives and boards and companies with highly experienced, highly decorated individuals running them in the organization, more data at their fingertips than they know what to do with it. And it's still, their strategic decisions end up being a coin toss. That's one. And for those of you who have ever been through or are part of a merger or acquisition, 80% of mergers and acquisitions fail. 80%. Think about that. That results in millions and billions of dollars of losses in shareholder value, right? So some of the core concepts of strategic management is really you're trying to obtain a sustainable competitive advantage. And there's a pretty good definition here. I'll let you guys read it about being an advantage that's more durable despite competitors' efforts. What happens a lot is organizations are able to develop a competitive advantage, right? There's something about your organization that the market likes, that people respond to. The question is, how easily replicable is it? Can what you're doing, can it be easily copied? Can it easily be modified? So obtaining a sustainable competitive advantage, which has a lot to do with the synergies that your people in your organization create as far as decisions, processes, new technologies that are hard to copy, hard to replicate. That's really how sustainable competitive. And when I say sustainable, it's never forever, folks. We all know, you can think of big names. For instance, I'll give you a quick example. If you take on the Dow Jones, if you take the companies listed now, only one or two of them were listed in the year 2000 on the Dow. So they're still there, right? It doesn't mean that they're not good companies. It doesn't mean that they're not still billion-dollar companies, multi-million-dollar companies, but it means it's hard to stay up in some of the largest organizations. And we know throughout history, if you look at the last 100 years, the big names that have failed, that have gone out of business due to their inability to adapt, to keep up with technology changes, being flexible, which is not easy for a large organization to do. But the list is very long and very deep on organizations that have not succeeded. So it's a constant quest. And all of us know that at our organizations, and this is what we teach in our business school as well, and taught through other business schools around the world, is that people must continually improve. You must keep on working on new products, new services that the world needs and desires. So in strategy, we can quantify a lot of these things. A lot of tools that exist in strategic management are very analytical, right? Content-based, analytical, that we can quantify. 3 strategic questions all firms must answer. 1, what is the firm's present situation? What are the industry conditions? For example, part of the reason 50% of strategic decisions fail is because we have things like pandemics, recessions, depressions, massive inflation, right? Things that aren't always expected. Because really what organizations are trying to do when they're forecasting is they're trying to essentially predict the future. What about our current company projects well into the future? What do we think the environment will be? How much do we think customers or clients will like our products or services? How can we match what we think their future needs will be? And that's difficult because no one knows unequivocally what will happen. But things that have to be considered: industry conditions, your market standing via competitive strengths and weaknesses. This is probably everyone on the call has heard of a SWOT analysis, right? And in strategic management research, there are different types of models that have been developed over the years. What's really good about this slide, for instance, is it captures a lot of the core, the essence of those particular charts, tables, diagrams, even if those particular charts, table, diagrams might be slightly different or tweaked or a different lens. These capture the core concepts. Second question, what direction to head and what performance targets to set? What about new buyer needs, growth opportunities, markets to de-emphasize or abandon? This is always a tough one. This is part of the reason the merger and acquisition market exists, and how to measure success. Historically, all that really mattered were shareholders and the financial part of the business. And yet what we know through strategic management research unequivocally, and I'll touch on it a little bit more as we keep going, is that having what's called a balanced scorecard and considering all stakeholders, not just shareholders. How nice of a place is it for your employees to work? How much are you contributing to those communities, right? How green is your particular organization, right? Also, one of the theories is called the stakeholder theory. Because there has been an emphasis on increasing stakeholder theory. The big question at the very top, folks, is organizations, and we in the academic world and people like myself who have almost 20 years of private sector experience as well, in addition to the academic side, understand that organizations exist in such large numbers now and have such an impact on our world, controlling so many resources. It can't be just about profit. Organizations must move forward with part of their strategy being concerned about the environment, right? ESG, if you've heard that term. Also, part of the reason diversity is so important is diversity of lenses and perspectives matter. Number one, because it's the right thing to do. But beyond that, what's really important as well is the case, folks. The research is very clear. Organizations that have more diverse boards, executives, and employee teams statistically significantly outperform organizations that don't, that are more homogeneous instead of heterogeneous, right? And so it would only make sense that a lot of organizations operate in a global market, and we're trying to sell products and services globally. Of course, it makes sense to have different lenses from everyone around the world, right? And yet that wasn't the case historically. And so this is an important part that we teach in our business school and in a number of different business schools. And a lot of companies are certainly moving in this direction, obviously, which is a very important and positive thing. So, okay, let's keep going. How to run that firm in ways that produce good results. How to attract customers, deciding what market positions to stake out, actions to achieve performance targets. And again, it ties how to measure success. So there's an old saying, you get what you measure, right? And a lot of us from a work environment, we know that depending on the goals we have are kind of how we individually align ourselves and or our teams in order to perform really well, because we'll be compensated in that way, shape, or form. Next slide. So 3 tests. Here's again from the research that we know, right? However, what our job is at all levels is to try and increase the statistical probability of our success. And if we know through the best research in the world that if we do certain things, that our probability of being successful is significantly higher than not integrating this type of information, right? That would not be a very good decision on our part. So that's part of the reason business research exists, why we partner with companies a lot of times to do different types of studies, quantitative, qualitative, etc. So again, the goal is for us to increase the statistical probability of our organizations performing well and succeeding. Okay, so what are some tests of a winning strategy? One, the goodness of fit. And you hear this a lot in HR, right? If you are hiring, if you are going through the interview process, the constant talk is about fit, right? Well, is the strategy your organization has selected, which we'll talk about a few different generic strategies in a couple slides, is it well matched to the company's internal and external situation? So this is in part the SWOT analysis, right? But it's very important to know what's happening in the external environment. There's acronyms like the PESTEL model, for instance, political, economical, societal, technology, etc. Right? Are you aware of factors, external factors outside your organization that could impact your internal organization and your products, your services, your synergies that your people create with products, teamwork, processes, etc. Right? And so how well are you matching what your organization is all about, your organizational identity? I'll talk a little bit more about vision, mission, purpose in a slide or two, but who are you as an organization and what are you trying to accomplish and how well does it match out in the marketplace? Second, the competitive advantage test. Is the strategy helping the company achieve a sustainable competitive advantage? Well, we talked a couple slides earlier that it's hard to develop a sustainable competitive advantage. And even if you have one, there's usually a time frame on it. It's not going to last 10, 20, 30 years, right? You may get a few years out of it, maybe 5 if you're fortunate. So you have to continually innovate and try and get better. That's why we have continual improvement processes, right? Lastly, the performance test. Is the strategy producing good company performance? And as you know, folks, all this has to be taken within the context of, for instance, how is your CEO and C-suite team, how are they running an organization, not just in good times, but in maybe normal times and also really difficult periods, right? Some of the best managerial jobs are when we're hit with something like a pandemic, which we've never experienced to this level, most of us, but also things economically, whether it's significant inflation or supply chain problems or significant recession, and how well your executive team navigates those time periods is it's not just, well, did they improve the business? Because they may have staved off. You may have weaker performance compared to the prior year, but you did it in an incredibly difficult environment. So to qualify as a winning strategy, a strategy must pass all 3 tests. So highlight these, circle these. So let's talk about the strategy executing process. And something I said early on is this isn't just about a one-time plan. And this, I'll preempt a little bit what I'm going to say about the board's role. But historically, a lot of times boards and the C-suite team would get together about once a year and maybe have a retreat. And they'd look out and say, well, what's our 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan? Where do we think we need to adapt? Where do we think we need to adjust, et cetera? Unfortunately, while that still exists, that's not enough anymore. Any executive board member will tell you that strategy is talked about at all of their meetings. So if a board happens to meet 5 or 6 times over the course of a year, strategy is always a part because of some things we talked about earlier about the pace of business, how international it is, how disruptive different type of business models can be, the risk of cybersecurity attacks, protecting our intellectual property and data, et cetera, et cetera. So part 1 is planning, but part 2 is it's also emergent. We have to be able to, our strategy plan has to be a living document, right? We have to be able to tweak and adapt. It doesn't mean that we discard our entire plan, right? But we have to be able to be flexible and adapt, which again is not that easy for big organizations. So here's 5 task steps that I'll go through pretty quickly here, folks, just to give you an idea. Developing a strategic vision, mission, and core values. Purpose, you could put purpose in there as well. right? This goes back to organizational identity. Who is your organization and what are you about? Making sure that people are adhering, all your employees, and that means it has to be talked about. That means it has to be communicated on a regular basis. These are your guideposts about who your organization is, what you stand for, what your business is about, right? And staying true to that, because as you know, folks, one of the core tenets of strategic management is you don't want to vary too far initially from your core capabilities. What are you good at? What got you to where you are? Doesn't mean you don't have to tweak, doesn't mean you have to introduce new products and services, but you cannot abandon what you've been really good at, because one of the most powerful concepts, and it's a pretty simple one, but one of the most powerful concepts in strategy is the concept literally of relatedness. Relatedness. And think about this, if you're a client, customer, even if you're an employee in one of your organizations, what's your core business and what are your organization's behaviors in terms of products, services, maybe involvement in the community, maybe involvement in the environment that is related to what your core business is? Because in Mindshare and how people view your organization, when they can more easily make connections between, wow, that's a neat extension, that's a neat product extension, brand extension, it's much more easy and palatable for them to accept that and consider that makes sense that your organization would do that. So second task, setting objectives. That's part of the planning I talked about that the board and the executive team will do, and then oftentimes it cascades throughout the organization. However, here's a very important takeaway, folks. If your organization does not do this, it is very helpful. Think about it. If you have 100 employees, 1,000, 50,000 employees, if you can solicit your employees' opinions on what are things that you think we could do better strategically, you get great ideas come from anywhere, right? And there are things closer sometimes to the ground level that are much more salient, much more effective than might the ideas that come from the corporate office. Okay? Let's look at task 3, crafting a strategy to achieve the objectives and move along the chosen path. So we're going to look at the different generic strategies on the next slide. 4, implementing and executing the strategy, right? Which is not always easy. However, what I will say, folks, this is where it's important that the vision, the mission, the strategic plan is constantly talked about and communicated with your employees, right? What it is and why it's important, because we're going to look towards the end about what really makes a good culture. And obviously part of it is people being willing to buy in, thinking that the organization exists for good reasons, that it's creating products and services that make the world better and better for individuals and for the world in general, as far as environmentally friendly. Number 5, monitoring, developing, evaluating performance, and initiating corrective adjustments. So this is obviously a feedback, right? So constant. This is part of your document being a live document, right? You still want to be guided here as your guidepost, but basically as you see how your strategy is playing out, of course, there are things that are emergent and you might have to tweak, you might have to adjust. Okay, so one of the things I primed just a little bit is the case for a balanced scorecard. And the history behind, so the balanced scorecard is something that the executive team agrees upon with the board, certain goals, certain objectives that the executive team says that they will hit and deliver to the board so that the shareholders feel that everybody's aligned in their targets that should grow the company, that should hopefully increase the stock price, that should return. Because what we know, folks, so the balanced scorecard came about 30 to 40 years ago, and it took a while for it to be adopted. But this ties back to what I shared earlier, that organizations historically used to be very finance driven. And it's not that finance is very important to running an organization, but what we statistically know, and this is unequivocally, we know this, that organizations that are strategic and have a balanced scorecard, you care, for instance, more about stakeholders and a number of different targets, that your overall organizational performance is significantly higher, statistically significantly higher than organizations that don't use a balanced scorecard. Okay. So just in some of these, I said it helps organizations set financial and strategic objectives. I'll just touch on the underlined here, a more complete and balanced view of a firm's overall performance, and also helps foster better financial performance, which is what we're after, especially if we're in the for-profit. If it's a nonprofit institution, that's a little bit different, right? So what are the key responsibilities of board members? Probably the primary one is think of your organization, even if you have a founder who is still maybe the chairman and CEO of the organization. The hope is that the organization that has been started and is running, and hopefully fairly successful, is that that entity will continue on past current leadership, past current employees, right? That the entity will continue on to provide important products, services to customers, clients, to help make our communities better, et cetera, right? In order to do that, it is as important as possible that you have independent board directors. Independent, meaning that their obligation is much more towards the long-term health of the organization rather than the current CEO or the current C-suite team. And this is an area that, and here's what's important. Most companies do a really good job on this front. And yet, if we pick up, if you turn on CNBC or Bloomberg or look at the Wall Street Journal online, every single day, we have some issues of corporate malfeasance in a whole bunch of different ways, okay? So here's some other points that define or talk about the independence. So part of the board's responsibility is to be informed about the firm's performance, basically act as a sounding board, help develop the strategic plan, right? Help with the audit process or overseeing. Overseeing is the proper word with boards. Nominating new potential board members that can help an organization move forward through certain intellectual capital or expertise that they might have, to hire and fire executives or the CEO, to have the courage to curb inappropriate or unduly risk management actions. It's very important for board members to test and press the CEO and or the executive team on what their strategic plan or thoughts are. What are the assumptions behind that? Where are the potential pitfalls? And this is why on a board, a few things. Of course, not everyone has to be an independent director, but a number of them help. But also with that is you want folks from the particular industry that you're in, but also folks outside that particular industry. So you have diversity in lenses, right? And diversity in a number of different ways, not just industry. Continuing on. So here's what we know, folks, 5 generic strategies that we know from the strategic management research, right? And this doesn't mean they can't be tweaked, doesn't mean they can't be altered. It depends on your business too. You might run a conglomerate where you have a corporate parent company and you have a number of subsidiary companies that may be completely unrelated. Now, there's a lot of research that says conglomerates don't do that well. However, the point is, for something like that, you would want different types of strategy depending on the type of business you're in. So we're looking at what's your target market over here. Are you looking for a broad base? Or are you looking for niche? And then down here, what type of competitive advantage is being pursued? Are you looking for more of a low-cost model or a differentiation model? We have an overall low-cost provider, more of a focused low-cost provider, a broad differentiator, and a focused differentiator, and then in the middle, a best cost provider. Overall low-cost provider, Walmart would be a good example here. A best cost provider would be something like Target. Over on the focused differentiation strategy, it doesn't always have to be at the very, very high end. All it means in differentiation is you're not as concerned about competing on price. You're willing to invest money into your organization, into your products, to compete at a higher price point, even very high price points, such as Tiffany, such as Porsche, such as Ferrari, as an example. Okay. So these are different type of generic strategies that are worthy of consideration. And the question is, this is always a fair question, when we talk with companies and say, what is your strategy? Can you articulate it? And if they don't normally drop something within these range or related to this concept of related, they probably don't have a legitimate strategy. They might have some plans or a checklist, but not a formal strategy. Continuing on. So let's talk about, and this is more folks in management research and academics. Our world is split a little bit into two areas: strategic management, which is the macro side, concerned about how to run companies well from the top and how to help them financially perform better so that they're not just average run companies. But we also have something called organizational behavior, which is driven basically by psychology in the workplace. Here's how important organizational culture is. It is the number one reason an organization succeeds or fails. The number one reason how healthy your culture is in your company or not. So let's look out at a couple things. I tried to capture what a great culture, and this is what the research shows us, what a great culture looks like. So let's go through this standout traits: a can-do spirit, a pervasive, results-oriented work climate where people go the extra mile, pride in doing things right, no excuses accountability, strong sense of involvement on the part of company personnel, an emphasis on individual initiative and creativity, which ties closely with technology and innovation. Folks, we know that throughout human history, whether it's a government or a company, the organizations that had the best technology in the world basically led for those time periods. They were the leaders. This could go anywhere from military, as far as governments are concerned, to private companies. But they're the leaders and they have the highest profit margins normally for a time, right? That's how important innovation and creativity is. A clear and unyielding expectation that all company personnel, from senior managers to frontline employees, will display high performance behaviors and passion for making the firm successful. So the challenge is, folks, this culture is not always that easy to build, right? It's a combination between leadership, the success, the actual success, and I'm talking about organizational value. What's your firm's value is driven 25% by senior leadership. It is the most powerful variable that drives an organization's value. So and that still means there's 75% of other types of variables that drive your organization. It has to be the mission, vision, purpose must be constantly communicated throughout the organization. Employees must feel like it's a good place to work, that they're treated well, that there are opportunities for advancement, that organizational justice is the term. And another is equity theory, where individuals feel that the organization is slighting them in some form or fashion, not all, but a number of employees will pull back and say, well, the organization committed to me X, Y, or Z and didn't come through on that, so I'm not going to do A, B, and C, right? And they won't mention it, they won't say it, they'll just do it. So part of the challenge is building organizations like that, okay? Okay, within that is social responsibility strategy, which is newer, I'll put it that way, and it's gotten a lot more traction over the last 10 decades. So let's just look at a couple things, how a company can integrate social responsibility into their overarching strategy. So they have to be ethically minded, right? And that comes from the top. Enron, when they failed, their board members, I think I'm pretty sure, double check me on this, that they had the dean of Stanford Business School on there. They had other prominent CEOs from Fortune 100 firms on their board, right? And their executive team had documents all around social responsibility, about ethics, about how important we have videos, recorded interviews with their CEO talking about how important ethics was to their organization. And it was a complete fabrication. So just keep that in mind. Continuing around, how are they in the community? Charitable causes, participating in activities, protecting and sustaining the environment, the well-being of employees, and actions to promote workforce diversity, right? So this is more of a stakeholder-centered model. And again, we know that running a balanced scorecard and strategic plan, rather than just letting finance, even though finance is very important, that companies are much more successful in doing that. Let's see if we have one more. I think I've got one more slide here that I'll just touch on briefly. So the merger and acquisition market is a very important market. So a merger, just a couple definitions, is the combining of two more firms into a single entity, becoming a new one. An acquisition is when one firm purchases another. And these aren't easy. And like I said, what's important, 80% of them fail, meaning what happens is usually the business unit or the company that's bought gets spun off, loses a whole bunch of value, and the organization has to decide what to do with it. So it's directly correlated, highly correlated to organizational culture, not being able to blend the cultures of two different organizations. And the primary difference, folks, aside from the definitions, is really how a couple things. Who ends up being the owners, management control, and the financial arrangements and how the deals are done.